The first time I saw him again, he was holding a baby goat and cussing at a rusted-out fence post like it had personally ruined his entire day. I hadn't even planned on stopping. Not really. I was just passing through to get to Asheville, trying to avoid the mess of I-40 when my car overheated outside a farm I didn't recognize. But there he was, on the other side of the ditch, sweat-soaked in a faded UNC t-shirt, one knee in the red clay, yelling, "God damn it, you stay in that pen or so help me I'll turn you into tacos." And the goat, predictably, just stared at him like it knew damn well he wouldn't do shit. I almost didn't believe it was him. 10 years had passed since I last saw Jesse Thomas, and yet there he was, older, broader in the shoulders, still wearing his baseball cap backwards like time had frozen him somewhere around age 19. I don't know what made me call out his name. Maybe it was the nostalgia, maybe the heat stroke, but as soon as I said it, Jesse, he looked up so fast the goat stumbled, and then he was standing, blinking at me like I was a ghost that had crawled out of his past. "Eli?" His voice hadn't changed, still smooth like maple syrup over gravel. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "I was gonna ask you the same thing," I said, glancing at the goat, who was now chewing on the corner of his shirt. "Looks like you're running a zoo." He chuckled, pulling the fabric away and tossing the goat a piece of carrot from his pocket. "It's a farm, sort of. Long story." He stepped closer, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You really Eli Torres? Or am I hallucinating from heat exhaustion?" "It's me," I said, and it hit me how weird that was. After all this time, after the way things ended, after the silence and the phone calls I never returned, he still recognized me. "Well, shit," he muttered, and for a second he just stood there, eyes scanning me like he was trying to figure out if I was real, or maybe if I was still the same. "Guess you better come inside before you melt. Car trouble?" "Yeah, I think the radiator blew. I wasn't planning on stopping, trust me." He gave me a look, half amused, half something else I couldn't name yet, and said, "Sure, but you stopped here." I followed him across the driveway, gravel crunching under my sneakers, and tried not to think about the last time I'd heard his voice. It was junior year, in the middle of the night, whispering through the speaker of my cheap, prepaid phone. I remember lying in bed, barely breathing, as he said he couldn't do it anymore, that it wasn't right, that he had to be who his dad wanted him to be. And then nothing. No texts. No calls. Just silence. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it was just one of those high school things that was never going to work out anyway. But the truth was, for a long time, he was the only person who'd ever seen me. Not just the version of me I showed everyone else, but the real me. And I hated that he took that with him when he left. The house was small but clean, the kind of place that felt lived in, worn furniture, a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, the scent of coffee and hay lingering in the air. He poured us both a glass of water without asking and leaned against the sink, watching me like he still wasn't sure I wasn't going to disappear. "So," he finally said, "you just passing through or—" "I'm heading to Asheville," I replied, sipping the water and ignoring the way his eyes lingered on my mouth. "Job interview. My life kind of fell apart in Raleigh. Figured I'd start over somewhere with better breweries." "Still doing design? Still trying," I said, and that made him smile, a little sad like he remembered the drawings I used to sneak into the margins of my math homework. He tilted his head. "It's good to see you." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. It was too honest, too soon, too much. "Yeah," I said instead, looking away. "You too." The silence stretched between us like a held breath. And even though we hadn't spoken in years, I could feel it. The thing we never really finished, never really got over, still hanging in the air like smoke. He didn't ask why I never called him back. I didn't ask why he disappeared. Maybe we were both too scared to say the words out loud. But something had shifted. Because when he stepped forward and said, "You can stay here tonight if you need to. Guest room's clean," I didn't hesitate. I just nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered what might happen if neither of us ran this time. I wasn't planning on staying, not really. I told myself I'd just crash for the night, thank him in the morning, call a tow truck, and keep heading west. But the guest room smelled like cedar and dust and some kind of fabric softener I vaguely remembered from high school, like whatever brand Jesse's mom used before she left, and maybe he kept buying out of habit. I dropped my bag at the foot of the bed, stood there for a second staring at the warped dresser, and then sat down on the edge of the mattress, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with a broken radiator. Down the hall, I could hear him moving around in the kitchen, opening cabinets, pouring something into a pan, the clink of glass against tile. I almost stayed put. Almost let the weight of the years between us hold me there. But I didn't. I got up, walked barefoot across the wood floor, and leaned against the kitchen doorway just as he was lighting the stove. "You still cook?" I asked, and he jumped slightly, like he hadn't expected me to come out. "Some things," he said without turning around. "Mostly breakfast stuff. But I make a killer grilled cheese." "That's a big claim," I said, stepping farther into the room. "People have been murdered over less." He finally looked at me, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Still the same smartass," I shrugged. "Some things never change." He stood there for a second, like he was trying to decide if he should say what was on his mind. Then he turned back to the stove, flipping the sandwich in the pan like he'd done it 1,000 times. "You disappeared," he said, quiet. "After graduation." I nodded slowly, unsure if he wanted an explanation, or just needed to say it out loud. "I had to," I replied. "You weren't exactly returning calls either." He didn't say anything for a minute. Just watched the bread brown in the pan like it held the answer to something. "I thought about it," he said eventually, reaching out. "But I figured you didn't want to hear from me." "You figured right," I said, maybe a little too fast, a little too sharp. He flinched, and I instantly regretted it. "I was angry," I added. "Still am, maybe. You didn't just ghost me, Jesse. You made me feel like what we had was something to be ashamed of." He didn't respond right away, but I could see his hands tighten around the spatula. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough like gravel. "It wasn't shame," he said. "It was fear." I opened my mouth, ready to snap back with something sarcastic or defensive, but then he turned and looked at me, really looked at me, and all the old fights drained out of me. "I wasn't brave like you," he said. "Not then." "And now?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He stepped around the counter, plate in hand, and set it down in front of me. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'm trying." I looked at the grilled cheese, then up at him. "You trying to make amends with dairy products now?" He let out a soft laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's a start." I took a bite. Still warm, buttery, with just the right amount of crisp. "Okay," I said with a nod. "That's pretty good." He grinned, and for a second it felt like nothing had changed. Like we were 17 again, sitting in the back of his pickup under the stars, legs tangled together, pretending we weren't terrified of what we were feeling. But we weren't 17 anymore, and this wasn't pretend. After we ate, he offered me a beer. We sat on the porch, the night air thick with crickets and humidity. He asked about Raleigh. I asked about the farm. Neither of us brought up the past again, but it hung there between us, heavy but not unbearable. At some point, the conversation drifted into silence. Not awkward, just quiet. Comfortable. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I never stopped thinking about you." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, the soft glow of the porch light catching the line of his jaw, the faint stubble on his cheek, the way his mouth twitched like he was afraid of what I might say back. "I mean it," he added. "I screwed up. I know that. And I don't expect anything from you. But having you here, it makes me feel like maybe I get a second chance." I let the silence stretch, watching the moths spiral around the light, before finally saying, "That radiator better take a long time to fix." He turned to me, confused. "Why?" Because I think I might need more than one night. His eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. Me too. The next morning I woke to the sound of something thumping against the window. Rhythmic and strange, like a branch tapping too deliberately. For a second, I didn't remember where I was. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, dust collecting on its edges, and the smell of coffee drifted in faintly from the hallway. Jesse's house. His guest room, the sun warming the patchwork quilt someone's grandmother probably made before the internet existed. Everything around me felt distant and dreamlike, and for a brief, unsteady moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. Him, the goat, the porch confession. But then the thump came again. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and crossed to the window. There he was, barefoot in the grass, trying to wrestle what looked like a busted hose from a tangle of chicken wire, while simultaneously holding a cup of coffee in his free hand. When he saw me, he grinned and mouthed, "Help?" I pulled on yesterday's jeans and stepped outside without bothering to brush my hair. The morning was damp, the air thick with dew and the smell of earth and animals. I crossed the yard barefoot, avoiding the muddy patches, and grabbed the hose from him, yanking it free with one sharp tug. "Thanks," he said. Sipping his coffee like this was all perfectly normal. I figured I'd let you sleep, but the chickens had other plans. I didn't ask why he was smiling at me like that, like something had shifted overnight. Maybe it had. Maybe that thing between us we'd always been too afraid to name had started to unbury itself. "Where's the goat?" I asked. "Banished," he replied, taking a long sip. I made her a separate pen. She kept trying to climb into the truck bed. I followed him toward the coop, pretending I wasn't watching the way his shirt clung to his back or how his boxers peaked just barely above the waistband of his jeans. We worked in companionable silence, feeding the chickens, fixing a loose board on the fence. He moved like someone who belonged here, grounded and deliberate, and it was jarring to think this was the same guy who used to sneak beers into Friday night football games and make jokes loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough that no one could trace them back to him. At one point, I reached for a nail at the same time he did, and our fingers brushed. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. Instead, he looked up at me, slow and careful. "I was scared of this," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Of what? Of still wanting you." My heart dropped into my stomach like someone had cut the line. The nail slipped from my hand and hit the dirt. "I didn't know you did," I said. "Not really. Not until yesterday." He stepped closer. "You kidding? I used to dream about you. In college, when I was with girls I didn't care about, I'd imagine it was you. Stupid, right?" "No," I said. "It's not." We stood there, inches apart, the chickens clucking softly in the background like they were waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. Just the sun creeping higher, the air thick with unspoken things. "I'm not that scared kid anymore," he said, "but I don't want to mess this up again." "Then don't," I told him. "But I'm not here for a summer fling, Jesse. I'm not 18 and looking for a secret." He nodded slowly. "Good, 'cause I'm not hiding anymore." He reached up and cupped the side of my face, thumb grazing the edge of my jaw like he was learning me all over again. His hand was warm and calloused, and it felt like something uncoiled in my chest just from that touch. Then he kissed me, soft at first. Testing. Careful, but when I didn't pull away, when I leaned into it, he deepened the kiss, his fingers threading through my hair, the coffee on his breath, the damp grass under our feet. It wasn't like the rushed, hidden kisses we used to steal in the back of his truck. This was something else. This was slow, intentional. This was a man who'd spent years carrying the weight of something he thought he'd lost, finally letting himself set it down. When we pulled apart, he didn't say anything, and neither did I. We didn't have to. The way he looked at me said enough. I ended up staying the whole weekend. I never called the tow truck. Jesse rigged something under the hood with a coat hanger and borrowed fan belt. And suddenly, my car wasn't broken anymore, but I still didn't leave. He didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't ask for permission. It just happened. Two people pretending like time hadn't passed, like this was always where we were supposed to be. By Sunday night, we were sharing a bed. Not in the way we used to. with guilt and fear thick in the air, but openly, freely. He held me like he didn't want to let go, and I let him. The radiator had held up just fine. I just didn't want to go. By Monday, it started to feel like a routine. He'd make coffee without asking how I liked it. Black, strong, slightly burnt from the ancient drip machine that wheezed every time it was turned on, and I'd pretend not to notice when he pressed too close behind me at the sink, like the house was smaller than it was. We moved around each other like two people who'd done this before in another lifetime, back when the world still felt too big and we were too small to fight it. The radio played low from the kitchen window, country songs I used to roll my eyes at, but now they just kind of fit. Dust in the air, heat in the walls, the way his voice sounded when he sang along softly under his breath while frying eggs. It should have felt strange. It didn't. He offered to drive into town with me to check out the radiator again, but I knew what that meant. Another excuse, another delay. I told him I'd go alone. He nodded but didn't push, just handed me the keys to his old truck like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Want me to come with?" he asked anyway, standing barefoot on the porch, arms crossed. "I think I need to go by myself," I said, just to remind myself I can. He nodded once, like he understood exactly what I meant. Then he stepped forward, pressed a kiss to the side of my neck, and whispered, "Don't take too long." The drive into town felt like stepping back into my own memory. Same two-lane roads, same faded signs, same gas station that somehow still charged cash only for everything under $10. The mechanic didn't have good news, but he didn't have bad news either. Just a shrug and a slow drawl about needing to order the part and it taking maybe a week, maybe more. I didn't rush back. I stopped by the grocery store, one of those chains that always smells like floor wax and artificial lemon, and picked up a few things he didn't ask for. Stuff I remembered he liked. The good peanut butter, real orange juice, the kind of bread that doesn't taste like cardboard. It felt domestic in a way that should have scared me, but instead made my chest ache with something warm and unfamiliar. When I got back, the yard was quiet. The goats were asleep under the oak tree, the chickens nowhere in sight. I walked in through the back, balancing the grocery bags in one arm, and heard music coming from the barn. I followed it. He was in the middle of the space, shirtless, sweat gleaming down his back, sawing through a length of wood with a handheld blade like he'd been at it for hours. There was a half-assembled bench nearby, something rustic and solid. He didn't see me at first. I watched him for a second, the way his muscles shifted, the way his mouth set in concentration. Then I cleared my throat. "You building furniture now?" He looked up, grinned. "Trying to." I set the bags down just inside the barn door. "Looks good." He wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, walked over, and peered inside the nearest bag. "You bought the fancy peanut butter." "You're welcome." He reached out, caught my wrist gently. "You didn't have to." Didn't say I did. His grip didn't tighten, didn't pull, but it lingered. "I meant what I said yesterday," he said, quieter now, about not hiding anymore. "I know. I don't want this to be just a thing that happens when you're stuck here. I don't want it to be temporary." I swallowed, eyes meeting his. "It doesn't have to be." His fingers slid from my wrist to my hand, interlacing like it was the most natural motion in the world. "Then let's not pretend like it is," he said. We didn't work on the bench that afternoon. We didn't unpack the groceries either. Instead, we ended up tangled in the sheets of his bed, the windows open, the breeze carrying in the scent of cut grass and dust. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't about proving anything. It was slow, steady, like we were relearning each other with every touch. He was careful with me in a way I hadn't expected, like he was memorizing all the ways I'd changed since we were kids. Afterward, he lay there with one arm behind his head, the other draped over my chest, fingers tapping lazily against my sternum. I stared at the ceiling, half dazed, skin still warm from where he'd touched me. "You think this could be real?" he asked. "I think it already is." He didn't answer, but the way he held me said everything I needed to hear. Later, I called the mechanic and told him not to rush on the part. The thing about Jesse was that he never did anything halfway. Whether it was a home-cooked breakfast, mending a busted fence, or falling asleep with his arms still wrapped around me like he was afraid I'd vanish in the night. He was all in. Once he decided to be, I'd forgotten that part of him. Or maybe I never got to really know it back then. We were too busy pretending it wasn't happening, too terrified someone might see. But now, here in the quiet hush of the foothills, with no one watching, there was nothing left to run from. By Thursday, I was still sleeping in his bed, and we weren't bothering to pretend like it was temporary anymore. His flannel hung off my shoulders in the morning, and he didn't blink when I made coffee in my boxers, brushing past him like we'd done this for years. We moved through the house like people who belonged together, and the rhythm of our days settled into something dangerously close to comfort. He'd work in the yard or the barn for a few hours while I cleaned up the guest room, not that I was sleeping there anymore, or sat on the porch editing old design projects I'd half abandoned back in Raleigh. He kept finding excuses to touch me, a hand on the small of my back when he passed by, fingers grazing mine when we shared a plate of food. A kiss dropped on my shoulder like punctuation at the end of a sentence. And I let him. I wanted it. I wanted all of it. But with that closeness came the cracks, the little things neither of us wanted to say out loud. It started one night after dinner. We were stretched out on the couch, legs overlapping, watching reruns of some dumb show I barely paid attention to, because his fingers kept tracing shapes into my thigh. I turned to say something stupid probably, but I caught the look on his face before the words left my mouth. He wasn't smiling. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes distant. "You okay?" I asked, nudging him lightly. He blinked, snapped back to the moment. "Yeah, just got a call from my dad earlier." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you want?" Jesse shrugged, but it wasn't casual. "He's coming by this weekend. Wants to check on the place. He doesn't know you're here." I sat up a little. "You gonna tell him?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the beer bottle on the table and rolled it between his palms, label peeling under his thumb. "He's not like your dad, Eli. You know that." "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "My dad yelled a lot, sure. Yours says nothing and lets the silence do the work." "I remember." He flinched at that, but I didn't take it back. "Do you want me gone when he comes?" I asked, quieter now. Jesse stared at the bottle like it had a better answer than he did. Then he looked at me, eyes raw and tired. "I don't want you gone. I don't know if I'm ready to explain it to him." "You don't have to explain anything," I said, standing. "Just don't lie." He nodded, but it was slow, reluctant. I walked to the kitchen, needed something to do, some way to break the heat rising in my chest. I hated how quickly that soft little world we'd built could splinter under the weight of one phone call. He followed a few minutes later, leaned against the doorway while I ran water over a dish I'd already washed. "Eli, I'm not asking you to come out for me," I said, not looking at him. "But I'm not going back to hiding, Jesse. Not for anyone. Not even you." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked just enough that I had to turn around. He stepped toward me slowly, like he thought I might move away. I didn't. "I'm not trying to make you small," he said. "I'm just still figuring out how to be this version of me around people who only ever knew the old one." I took a breath, let it out, then figure it out with me. His shoulders sagged, like I'd said something he didn't even know he needed to hear. He nodded, stepped closer, and wrapped his arms around me, pressing his forehead to mine. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I know." We didn't talk about it again that night. We just held each other until the weight of it settled, and then we went to bed like nothing had changed, even though everything had. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. A note sat on the pillow where his head had been, written in his messy scrawl. "Gone into town early, back soon. I want you here when he comes." It wasn't everything, but it was enough, for now. Saturday came heavy with heat and that kind of nervous energy that clings to your skin long before anything actually happens. Jesse had been on edge since the moment he got up. He made coffee and barely drank it, kept checking the front porch like he expected his dad to come barreling up the driveway with a shotgun and a sermon. I stayed quiet for most of the morning, gave him space, even though my stomach twisted tighter every time he avoided looking at me. By noon, the sun was high, and the cicadas were screaming like they had something to prove. Jesse's truck was parked out front, dust still clinging to the fenders from our drive into town yesterday. We'd picked up a few things: iced tea, sandwich fixings, some repair parts for the back gate, and he'd held my hand in the hardware store without thinking. That moment had felt like a miracle. Now, standing on his porch, he looked like he was waiting for a fight. "Don't say anything you're not ready to say," I told him as we finished putting together lunch. "But don't shut me out either." He paused, bread in one hand, head tilted just slightly. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm just trying not to fuck this up." "You're not fucking it up, you're just scared. Same thing sometimes," he muttered. When his dad finally pulled up, old Dodge, same one I remembered from high school, I watched Jesse stand a little straighter, pull his shoulders back like armor. The older man got out slow, one hand on the door for balance, the other adjusting a baseball cap faded to the point of being colorless. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just scanned the porch, took in Jesse, then me. "Didn't know you had company," he said, voice like gravel. "Didn't know I needed to ask," Jesse replied, tone flat. His dad's eyes flicked to me. "Eli Torres, right?" I nodded, unsure what I was supposed to say. "Hey, Mr. Thomas. Long time." He gave a grunt of acknowledgement and followed Jesse inside without another word. The tension followed him like a shadow. Even the damn dog stopped barking when he crossed the threshold. Jesse poured sweet tea without asking, slid it across the table like a peace offering, and for a while they talked about the land, how the rain had been too light, how the old barn roof needed patching, how the feed store raised their prices again. I waited, sipping my tea, letting them circle each other. Then it happened. Jesse mentioned the goats. His dad asked who'd built the new fencing. Jesse hesitated, looked at me, and said, "We did." Silence. His father's hand stilled around the glass. "We?" "Yeah," Jesse said. "Me and Eli. You two, working together now, we're seeing each other," Jesse said. Quiet, but firm. No tremble, no apology. His father didn't move for a long moment. Then he leaned back, looked between us, and said, "Huh, just that. No shouting, no storming out, no threats or scripture, just a quiet, unreadable, huh." Jesse let out a breath so slow I almost didn't hear it. He looked like he'd been holding it in since breakfast. "I see," his dad added, and took another sip of tea like the floor hadn't just shifted under us. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Jesse had done what I hadn't expected him to. He'd stood up. They kept talking, slowly, circling back to safer ground. Repairs, weather, harvest dates. But the air felt lighter somehow, like a storm had passed that never quite broke open. After his dad left, Jesse shut the door and leaned against it. Eyes closed, shoulders finally dropping. "You okay?" I asked. He opened his eyes, came toward me, and wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my neck. "No," he said into my skin, "but I'm getting there." That night, we stood outside and watched the fireflies come out. He reached for my hand without looking, and I laced our fingers together like it was always supposed to be that way. The crickets hummed. The air smelled like cut grass and hope. And when he turned to kiss me, slow and certain, I didn't think about the past or the things we hadn't said. I just kissed him back. By the following week, the part for my radiator finally came in. The mechanic left me a voicemail saying I could come pick up the car anytime. He sounded almost disappointed, like he'd grown fond of the back and forth of delay, like maybe he suspected something had changed out here on the farm, but knew better than to ask. I listened to the message twice, then slipped my phone back into my pocket and stood there on the porch, staring out at the dusty driveway like it might offer a reason to stay a little longer. Inside, Jesse was fixing breakfast. Eggs, toast, the last of the bacon we bought 2 days ago. He didn't know yet. I didn't know how to tell him. It wasn't that I didn't want to go. It was that going meant admitting this had an end date. That I had to go back to my life, my bills, my search for a job, that I couldn't live in this pause forever, no matter how badly I wanted to. He glanced up when I walked in, flicked his eyes toward the stove, then back to me. "You okay?" "The mechanic called," I said. "The car's ready." He nodded once, slid the eggs onto a plate without comment. "I could pick it up today." "Could?" he said, setting the plate down in front of me, then sitting across the table. He didn't touch his food, just looked at me, waiting. "I haven't decided if I will," I added. That broke something. His shoulders relaxed, just a little. He let out a breath he'd been holding all morning. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "But I do," I told him. "Because if I don't, I'll just keep floating here. And eventually, I'll start resenting the stillness." He stared at the table, then reached out and traced the rim of his coffee mug. "What if I came with you?" I blinked. "What?" "To Asheville," he said, "or wherever you end up. I could make it work, sell some stuff, lease out the property. It's not forever. Nothing has to be forever." My heart started pounding, not in fear, but in something closer to awe. "You'd do that?" "For you?" he said, looking up. "Yeah, I would." I pushed my plate aside and reached for his hand across the table. "We don't have to figure out the rest of our lives today. I just need to know this thing between us. It's real. That you're not going to disappear when it gets hard." "I won't," he said, squeezing my hand. "Not again." The decision wasn't easy. That afternoon, I drove into town alone, picked up the car, thanked the mechanic. I could have hit the road then, headed west, gone back to the familiar rhythm of trying to rebuild the life I'd left behind. But when I sat behind the wheel and looked out at the hazy line of the horizon, I realized something. The version of me I was chasing in the city didn't exist anymore. That person had changed here, in Jesse's house, in his bed, in the quiet moments that weren't quiet at all. I turned the key, let the engine hum to life, and drove back to the farm. He was out by the barn, shirt off, hammer in hand, sweat running down his spine. I parked, got out, and called his name. When he turned, I said, "I'm staying." His whole face lit up in that crooked, unguarded way I hadn't seen since we were 17, sitting under a sky full of stars, whispering the kind of promises we didn't know how to keep back then. He dropped the hammer, walked straight over, and kissed me like we had time. And this time, we did.